Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest Legal Cheek virtual student event in partnership with BPP University Law School. I'm Juliet Griffiths, Head of Student Engagement here at Legal Cheek, and I'm excited to introduce this afternoon's session, which is the latest in a series of SQE-themed virtual events we're running with BPP. Although the SQE has been in force for a couple of years, the assessments still remain quite a daunting prospect for many aspiring solicitors. To make sure that you feel totally equipped to tackle the exams, today we're going to be covering everything you need to know to pass SQE1, which is the first stage. Previously, we also hosted a similar event focusing solely on SQE2. If you missed this, don't worry. The full event recording will be found on our website. Besides this, you can find even more information about the SQE on our SQE Facts page, which includes answers to your most frequently asked questions written by BPP's SQE experts. And my colleague will post a link to this page in the chat in just a moment. So moving on to this afternoon's event, I'm delighted to introduce BPP's Head of Outreach and former City Law Firm partner, Johnny Hurst, who will be hosting this session alongside SQE award leaders Alison Banks and Aisha Anandappa. They are also joined here on the panel by Michaela Hristova and Christian Stocker, future trainees at Stevenson Harwood and Walker Morris, who have also recently completed the SQE1 with BPP. Shortly, I'm going to drop off stage and hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves properly. But first, I'm just going to quickly explain how this afternoon's event will work. For the next hour, we're going to be hearing from BPP about all things SQE1 and how you can maximise your chances of passing the assessments. At 5 p.m-ish, I will pop back up on stage and direct everyone to the expo for an hour of virtual networking with the speakers, which is a great opportunity to ask your burning questions. During the discussion here on stage, you can ask your questions as we go along in the chat tab, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. But it may be best to hold on to these until the networking, as we have got quite a packed schedule here this afternoon. The only other couple of things to flag is just to make sure that your chat is set to stage and not event, so that we can see your questions as they come through. Also, don't forget to answer this afternoon's poll, where we're asking where you are on your law journey. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand straight over to Johnny.
Thank you so much, Juliet, and welcome to our deep dive into the SQE1 assessments. I'm Johnny Hurst. As Juliet mentioned, I'm the head of outreach and a former partner in a city law firm back in the day. What we're going to do for you today is to go through many aspects of the SQE, and in particular the SQE1 assessment, because there are a lot of questions that many students have, and we've got loads of those in advance. So I would just echo the point that Juliet mentioned earlier. Just keep your powder dry on questions into the chat, because we're going to be answering many of those questions in the session, and maybe hold on to those until the networking afterwards. That would be really helpful. In the meantime, let us introduce you now to our four panelists. Let's start off with Aisha. Aisha, tell us who you are, what you do, what your background is.
Thanks very much, Johnny. So, my name's Aisha Anandappa, and I am one of the two award leaders for Essentials for Practice on our SQE programme at BPP. My fellow award leader is also on the call today, so I'll leave her to introduce herself. So in terms of the part of the LLM we particularly look after, it is that Essentials for Practice, essentially elective stage of the programme. So it's very nice to be with you here today. And maybe on that note, Johnny, I'll pass over to Alison as a
Great stuff.
Yep.
Alison.
Thanks very much, Aisha. Hi, everybody. So my name's Alison Banks. As Aisha said, I am with her an award leader for the Essentials to Practice module, which is the final term of our LLM on our SQE programme, where we go into interesting areas of practice that really align with what law firms are looking for from their future joiners. So really interesting, exciting part of the course to be involved in. I also am the award leader for the City Consortium Plus programme. So yeah, looking forward to receiving your questions and hopefully helping you get some more information about how this whole SQE1 thing works.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Michaela, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. It's very nice to virtually meet you. My name is Michaela. I am currently doing the LLM SQE1 and 2 at BPP Holborn. I did a law degree at Southampton University, and I will be joining Stevenson Harwood in September 2024.
Great stuff. And finally, Christian.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm an SQE student as well, doing the LLM like Michaela. So I've done my SQE1, now about to do SQE2 in about 20 days, which is fun. And then, yeah, as Juliet said, I'm a future trainee for Walker Morris as well.
Okay, my sound and connection seems to be struggling a little bit, so apologies if that gets bad. If Juliet, you let us know if I am inaudible at any stage, and we will reboot if necessary. Okay, well let's have a look at the SQE, and I think one thing that we always do in these sessions is to not assume that people on the call have a huge amount of knowledge, because the SQE is a really complicated beast. So what we're going to be doing is to tell you what the SQE is, and then taking a number of questions that were sent in advance about how to prepare for the SQE. We'll talk about costs and accessibility to the SQE. We'll look at pass rates. We'll look at the SQE LPC dilemma for those current third years on LLBs who potentially could still do the LPC, or people who are already LLB graduates or conversion graduates. And we'll look at a sample question as well and give you a go against the clock to see how you get on that. So let's have a look at the SQE in outline first of all, because I think it's really important that we don't assume that anyone's got some knowledge. Aisha and Alison, we've got an overview here of the pathway. I think, Aisha, you were going to take this, weren't you, just to explain what that SQE pathway is, because not everybody will fully understand what's ahead of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've got here on the slide is the pathway to qualification as a solicitor now under the SQE regime. Sorry, excuse me. So in terms of that pathway, Johnny, students will have undertaken a degree or equivalent and then move on to their SQE. And the SQE forms two parts for people who are new to looking at the SQE. SQE Part 1, and that's what the focus of today is really all about. And then after that, and students being successful on Part 1, they're moving on to Part 2, which is what Christian was speaking about there, coming up for him soon. And we'll focus on Part 1 today, but we are going to talk briefly about what Part 2 entails as well. Both of those are assessed centrally by the SRA, and both of those have to be passed successfully in order to qualify as a solicitor under this regime. In addition to that, in order to qualify, students will also have to complete qualifying work experience. And the ways in which qualifying work experience can be achieved and what can count towards qualifying work experience, it's fair to say, Johnny, isn't it, that it's much wider than it used to be. And we're going to talk a bit about that. There have been some questions, I think, around that coming in before today's presentation as well. And then did we lose the slides just there? Johnny, I'm sure we'll be back in just a second. Luckily, I remember the last part as well. And I was just going to make the point that at the point of qualification and also continuously afterwards, making sure that you're able to satisfy the character and suitability requirements in order to practice as a solicitor as well. But broadly, that is the journey through the SQE. So hopefully Johnny will be back with us in just a second, but that's where we are with that. I don't know if we want to try to. We'll wait. We'll give Johnny a minute. I'm sure he'll be back.
So maybe while we're filling time, we can ask Michaela and Christian. So you're both presumably doing kind of conventional training contracts. That's what you'll be moving on to in terms of qualifying work experience. Is that right?
Yes.
What's your pathway
Yes.
look like? Brilliant.
Yeah.
So Christian, when are you due to start your training contract?
September the 2nd.
Super. Okay. And Michaela, same for you?
Same here. Yeah.
Okay. That's
and did
great.
both of you do? Oh, sorry, I was gonna.
No,
did you
go
do
for it.
Did you do law degrees, or did you come in a different route, a different degree, and then onto law foundations?
I did a law degree.
Sorry.
Yeah, you did a law degree. Yeah, and
Yeah,
Christian?
I did a law degree as well in
Interesting. And did you come straight on to do an SQE preparation course? Or, or was there a gap between completing your degree and starting?
I finished my law degree in June and then straight on to the SQE.
No rest for the wicked. Same for you, Christian?
No, I actually had a gap for a year.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I worked for a little bit and went traveling.
Good.
And then came here.
Oh, that's good. Johnny, you're back.
I'm so sorry. I seem to have a problem with my internet connection. I hope it's just a one-off, but we'll proceed with asking everybody, well, what is the SQE? And as I do that, I'll get the slides up,
Brilliant.
which will be helpful for you to be able to identify that. So let me just get that on the screen, and I'm sure Juliet will share that now. Here we are. So what is the SQE? So a lot of people don't know what it is. So very briefly in outline, our focus is on this, which is SQE1. Alison, what we got here is half of the syllabus. Why have we sort of summarized it in this way?
Yeah. So thank you, Johnny. So the SQE, the SQE1 assessments are assessing students not just on legal practice areas, which is what the old LPC or the current LPC does, but also on their underlying black letter law knowledge. So actually what we have in white text is, the sort of underlying law that students will be familiar with from their law degrees or indeed from law conversion courses. So SQE1, 2 papers, as you can see, long MCQ assessments, as we'll come on to. They will assess a range of underlying law, but also legal practice subjects. So what we have on the slide depicts that underlying law.
And there we've got the practice subjects, haven't we?
Exactly. So that is what will tend to be new to students who've either done a law degree or a law conversion course. So the text that we have in black there: business law and practice, dispute resolution, property practice, wills, criminal practice, and solicitors' accounts. Those are all, as the names suggest, really kind of practice areas, practical ways of applying the law. So that tends to be what the SQE1 prep courses are directed towards. And there's an assumption, expectation that students will bring back up to the surface the underlying law that they will have done either in a law degree or in a conversion course. But both of those obviously really important in terms of passing SQE1.
And of course, it's 360 questions across 2 papers, which we'll talk about Michaela and Christian's experience of that in a moment. We're just giving the overview of the whole SQE regime. If we could just explain what SQE2 is, Aisha, and then we'll bring in the students to talk about their experience of how they prepped for SQE1.
Yeah, absolutely. So SQE2 is the skills-based assessments that students sit under this centralised regime. And you can see from the slide here that there are 16 mini assessments that students will sit across 6 different skills. 2 of those are oral skills, so looking at interviewing and advocacy. And then you've got the 4 written skills on there as well: case and matter analysis, legal research, legal writing, and legal drafting. And I think it's worth saying as well, and Christian and Michaela, this will be very much at the forefront of your minds as well, that these skills are assessed in the context of the functioning legal knowledge that students have acquired from their SQE1 exams. So in studying for these skills and practicing these skills, very much keeping that legal knowledge alive as well.
And just to say, we'll be sharing these slides with everybody at the end of this session. So we're focusing, as we said right at the top, on the SQE1 assessments themselves. So these assessments here, I suppose this is 360 questions on 2 papers set a week apart. What are your recollections of it as an experience, Christian, in terms of having gone through it?
not amazing. I mean, I got through it. It's obviously very intensive, 360 questions of quite a hard format as well, which I'm sure we're going to go on to with possible answers that a lot of them can be right in many ways. It does take a lot of work, but I think good time management and working smart can get you through it. But I don't really like recollecting about that January revision period.
Okay, we'll come on to some of the stuff that I'm sure you've got some learnings that you've got that you'll be able to share with the students. Michaela, just very briefly, just in a one-line, two-liner, what are your overall recollection of having gone through the assessment for SQE1?
I completely agree with what was just said. I think it was not as bad simply because after a few practice questions and just getting used to being timed, it gets quite easier with time. So yeah,
Great.
there's hope.
So we've got lots of questions about how to prepare, and we'll talk about your preparation journey in a moment. But maybe if we go over to Aisha and Alison now, is it strictly necessary to go to a law school to prepare for the SQE? We've got a student from the University of Exeter who's asked that question. So is it strictly necessary, and what do we recommend? I think you probably know what the answer to that's going to be, folks. But Aisha and Alison.
Well, obviously, we would strongly recommend that students go to a law school to prepare for the SQE. But I mean, it's not an unreasonable question to ask, because actually the SRA do not prescribe how students prepare for SQE. The only kind of prescription really isn't it, Johnny, that you have a degree. It's not necessarily even a degree in law. But having said that, and for the reasons I'm sure we'll come on to as we kind of look at the assessment regime and the rigor and the difficulty of that regime, you need to have a really good grounding, of course, in the underlying law, but also in those legal practice areas. And that's quite difficult to assimilate for these really tough MCQ assessments where the specification is very broad, and really you would benefit from the guidance, we would say certainly, of legal professionals and law school tutors. I don't know, Aisha, is there anything that you would want to add to that?
No, I completely agree. I can definitely see why the question's been asked, and I've seen that question asked several times before, but I would really reiterate as well, given the breadth of what's covered in these specifications, and also the nature of the assessments that we are going to go into as well. Obviously we feel that there is real value and benefit in attending law school for preparing you for these.
Yeah, just folks, they're really high stakes assessments, as I'm sure many of you know this already, and the pass rate is relatively low, and therefore, given the fact that it's quite expensive each time to sit the assessment, you really want to be preparing yourself so you only sit once if at all possible, not least because it's quite a beast of an exam to get through, as Michaela and Christian have alluded. So yeah, in theory, yes, you can prepare yourself from a textbook and do it on your own, but we don't recommend it. Getting a steer from really experienced tutors in a law school will give you
I think we've just lost Johnny there again. But to finish off on what he was saying, I'm pretty sure that he was saying I'll give you, a really good grounding really in what you need in getting ready for these assessments. I don't know, Michaela, did you have any thoughts around this question at all? Being someone who has obviously attended law school for the purposes of getting ready for the exams, do you feel the benefit, hopefully?
I think from my experience, it was very useful to have a legal background, and definitely played a part in understanding the underlying legal subjects. As you already mentioned, it's a huge volume of information, so it definitely helped.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michaela, what you're talking about there is in particular the underlying law and the knowledge that you'd got from your law degree in respect of that.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, definitely.
absolutely. Okay. And Christian, what about you?
Yeah, definitely. I would have hated to have to sit it without one, whether it's a law degree or like the GDL or a conversion. Either are good. But yeah, just for that underlying law. I mean, I'd go as far to argue that a conversion or GDL might even be in some ways preferable, because I guess you get all of that knowledge for the year before you might go on to do the SQE. But regardless, yeah, definitely very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also with conversion courses, now that the SQE has, been around for a few years, I think that, in terms of crafting conversion courses, to make sure that they are as applicable as possible for SQE, that's also really beneficial. I'm sure that university undergraduate law degrees as well, probably looking ahead to what their students might be doing in the future, will also just have an eye on that spec and making sure that it covers what it needs to. And I suppose the other thing, let's not lose sight of the kind of camaraderie of working together in class and, kind of going through that experience, as a cohort. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add, Christian or Michaela, in terms of, the kind of classroom experience and how that perhaps helped you in prepping for SQE1.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely helpful, not just because of the teaching, but as you said, having people around you who are doing the exact same thing, people you can ask questions of. And obviously, I actually went home to revise because I have my assessments there. But even having people to call and group chats to message in, being like, hey, is anyone else stressed, was the main one. So just on point of law, it is nice.
Good. And what about you, Michaela?
Yeah, same. In fact, in my class, we managed to make study groups. So I was in a study group with a few of my friends that I met on the course, and we were able to share notes, help each other with MCQs, and this was very helpful as well.
That's really good. That's lovely to hear. Obviously, from the tutor side, we see what happens in the classroom, and obviously that we support students in that way. But it's really nice that you've developed your own networks and ways of working, and I'm sure that stood you in good stead as you've successfully completed SQE. So that's really good. That's really good to hear. Hopefully Johnny will be back with us before too long.
I know.
Here
we go.
Sorry, just me. Just wanted to. I've just touched base with Johnny. I think he's rebooting his computer just to see if that resolves the problem. In the meantime, he's going to send me a copy of the slides so I can just share them. So I'll just get those up in a couple of moments. But if there's any other questions you want to ask amongst yourselves in the meantime, I've got a few here if you'd like me to ask some questions. But otherwise, happy to let you carry on. While I just get these slides up.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think where we were was really talking about in response to a question that had come in from a student, actually, Juliet, about whether or not you needed to do go to law school to prepare for SQE1. So we've been kind of reflecting on why Christian and Michaela decided to do that, given their law degree backgrounds and so on and so forth. And the value that I think they, hopefully not speaking for you, but the value you found of working collaboratively. Yeah, that's good. Great. So hopefully the slides will pop up soon.
Yeah, I'm just waiting to receive them from Johnny. I have got some more questions here that I could go through if you'd like.
Why not? Try.
Let's do that.
So I've got a few student submitted questions. To be honest, they're mostly geared towards Christian and Michaela, if you're okay with answering some questions about how it was from your perspective. So I've got one here from a student from KCL University who's asked, looking back on your experience of the SQE so far, what's one thing that you wish you could have changed or started earlier with the knowledge that you've got now? So maybe, Christian, if I start with you on this one.
Done the LPC. No, I'm joking. Something I could have changed. I think getting on work as early as possible, especially with the underlying stuff, because I kind of took, although it was really helpful, obviously, as I said, to do a law degree and have that underlying knowledge, I wish I would have got on it straight away, because for January anyway, and in the final month, you kind of realize that you've got some holes in your knowledge and because of how much there is to learn, you have to focus on so much. So having forgotten a lot of what I did at university in those underlying parts, it would have been nice to start maybe around September, hammer it in through revision sessions or whatnot, and then given myself slightly less to do at the end. Because it's a weird exam, because it was like the first time that I actually felt like I couldn't do everything. It was more like, let's reduce the stack of paper of stuff I don't know to about this, and then hopefully I'll be okay. And that does come with a bit of stress, but I'm sure if you get on the right foot early, you can reduce that even further, and especially with the underlying law.
Fabulous, great advice there. Michaela, have you got anything else from your end that you'd add?
I think I would say my experience was very similar. In fact, if I have to be completely honest, I started revising the underlying law in November. So this was a month before the internal BPP exams. It worked out quite well at the end, but I was under a lot of stress. So if there is one thing that I could say to myself, definitely start early. And one other thing would definitely be figuring out what kind of notes work best for me. Just because the SQE is such a different exam format, you're required to know a lot of the law closed book. So I went through figuring out what works best, flashcards, mind maps, or simply the law on a Word document. So this took me like 3 or 4 weeks. And then I had to go back and change my notes to fit the format that actually worked best for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point as well, Michaela. And what I've heard from students is that sometimes different approaches work for different subjects as well. So depending on, you know, maybe how comfortable you are with particular subjects, or, you know, where you feel like there needed to be a bit more focus, a slightly different approach was taken for note taking for that reason as well. I would completely reiterate the point about the underlying law as well. It's something that we really emphasize as tutors and starting students on program, but hearing it from, you know, it's never going to be received as well as it is from hearing from people who've been through the experience, and I think it is an important message. I think the other thing is, and I'm sure both of you found it as well, in terms of that initial evaluation of what areas of underlying law you needed to focus on, because again, everyone's in a really different place. Some people have done, as you said, Christian, law foundations relatively recently. It's aligned quite closely maybe with the SQE spec, and some people may have undertaken a law degree a number of years ago and are therefore in a slightly different place. So I think that gap analysis as well, at the very start, is really important and useful for informing your revision process as well.
Fabulous. I think so. We've got the slides back now, so we'll just go to, I think it was the sort of 3rd or 4th slide that we were on. So if we just skip ahead a few slides.
Yeah, it was a slide that had a question from a student from Exeter University, I think.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah. So the question. Oh, sorry.
So actually, that speech bubble that's just oh, that's all right. There was that we haven't previously seen that question, have we? There's the student from Canterbury Christchurch, I think.
No.
Okay. So actually, I don't know. Should I deal with this one? I guess because Christian and Michaela, you've both come from law backgrounds, haven't you? As you've explained that you both actually did law degrees. So we've got a question here from that came in from a student who comes from a non-law background, and is wondering about kind of further preparation before enrolling onto our LLM law conversion with SQE1. So that particular program is designed to be the a law conversion course with then SQE1 preparation as your final term. What I would say is, in terms of kind of concerns about studying and so on and so forth, is that you will get lots of support from your tutors, obviously, in terms of the right approach to take, and this course is very much designed with SQE ultimately in mind. So in the way that you're assessed, so lots of multiple choice questions and that kind of thing, as well as obviously giving you what you need in terms of that underlying law. So in terms of further preparation before you enroll on a program, I guess it boils down to what sort of law do you want to practice ultimately, what sort of firm might you want to work for, what are you interested in. So that would be my kind of recommendation to someone coming from a completely non-law background. It's kind of looking at why you might want to be a lawyer and what sort of areas you might want to practice in. I don't know, Aisha, is there anything you'd want to add on that?
No, I think that's right. And I think to give that reassurance again, as Alison said, your tutors will definitely be able to aligned to the fact that you've been out of study for a while, that very used to that experience as well. So not to worry too much. And as Alison said, maybe focus more around what you're looking to achieve from it long term, rather than worrying about the course itself, I'd say. Yeah, in the lead up to it, definitely.
Okay, so I think we can probably move on, actually, Juliet, if that's okay. Thank you.
So again, a few more questions, Alison, here around SQE1 preparation and study. So how many hours of studying per week or day is a good amount of studying for the SQE? I don't know, Christian or Michaela, do one of you want to speak about what you'd say about this, obviously with a focus on SQE1?
I think that's a very subjective question. It depends on what works best for you. If I can speak from my experience, I would treat preparation for SQE1 as a very demanding job. So I would make sure to put in at least 8 hours a day during the week. Sometimes it would be more, sometimes it would be less, and sometimes I would also have to work on a weekend. But I would definitely say with good time management is possible to happen.
Yeah. So yeah, a full-time working week, and possibly an odd weekend, depending on how the week goes. Michaela, yeah. Christian, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, it's obviously subjective because it's how well you know the content at the end of the day. I started off not working on the weekends. I promised myself that I wouldn't for about 5 weeks until it became necessary. So it is something you have to do. But I think I'm probably starting to scare people who are watching this now. But it is okay if you, as Michaela said, get your time management. But that really does come from not so much learning the concept, but learning the specification. So, I mean, I think for everyone watching this, you can go on the SR8 website and have a look at the SQE1 specification, especially if you're at university or do conversion, see what you know, and then obviously at the time, look about what you don't know, and then plan a timetable accordingly. And you might be able to reduce the hours instead of doing what I sometimes did, which was a bit of a frantic panic.
Thank you, Christian. Actually, that reminds me of something you said earlier about being comfortable that there will be some things that come up on that MCQ assessment that you won't know, when it comes to because the breadth of this assessment is such that, to an extent, obviously everyone must prepare as much as possible, but don't be, too phased if there are the odd kind of questions that strike you as, goodness, I don't know, because it is so broad, and you've got to kind of recognize that.
Yeah, it is. And just to add lastly, because I'm conscious I've probably been scaring people, you can get some of those 300 questions wrong, obviously, and quite a lot. So it's not too horrible for that reason.
That's all good.
Thanks very much.
Hello, folks. I am back. Perhaps if we could just lose the shared slide, and I'll get the slides up so I can control them. That'd be great. Thanks, folks.
No worries.
Apologies for that. I've had some terrible internet connections, but thank you for holding the fort so well. Right, so here we are. Just getting the slides back up. Which of the 3 questions did we get to?
So we were just looking, Johnny, there was the slide that says SQE1 preparation, and there was a question about number of hours of study a week or day. So we've just done the first one, the University of Westminster question there. So we haven't done the other 2 yet.
Thank you so much. So how do you balance your study schedule with your other commitments whilst preparing for SQE1? Have you got any tips on how to maintain your focus and productivity? Michaela, I think we've talked about that a little bit before when we had a chat a few weeks ago. What are your tips?
I would say just make sure you plan ahead. So I would always make sure to have a couple of hours during the week where I could meet my friends, have my hobbies, because I know that preparing for such a tough exam can be very daunting and you may feel like you need to do work all the time, but sometimes rest is productive. So I would definitely make sure to allow some time to basically have a social life.
Yeah. Did you find that yourself, Christian? Did you manage to keep the balance, or was that tough with the amount of work you had to do?
Depends on what you mean by balance, but I do agree with Michaela. Like, rest is obviously productive, because I mean, I'm sure many people are aware you can go sit in a library for about 10 hours and get very little done if you're not productive. So it is important to make sure you're having those breaks that are necessary.
That's really sensible. And what are your thoughts on working part-time while studying the SQE? Is that possible?
I mean, I personally didn't, but two of my good friends in my course were for 16 hours a week. I'm not sure if that stayed right until the end, but they managed it well, possibly with some earlier mornings than me, but it is possible. I personally wouldn't have liked to do it though.
Yeah, what's our official line on that, Alison?
So with our full-time programs are full-time. So I think as Michaela said, it is a packed course, and attendance obviously at the workshops is compulsory. So we wouldn't recommend that students take on too much in the way of part-time work if they're studying with us part-time. Sorry, full-time, I should say. Of course, there are part-time programs where students are naturally balancing work with part-time study, but those obviously are extended over a longer period than a full-time course. So we are, of course, though, conscious that there are many good reasons why students may need to work while they're studying. But to the extent it's possible to kind of keep that relatively low level in terms of hours and commitment, that's what we'd recommend, given the commitment that students are making in terms of the SQE, and obviously the cost of sitting those assessments and wanting, as you said, Johnny, to be able to put in the best position to pass those first time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what the part-time course is there for, if you need to work. And yeah, I'd echo that. We do recognise that students do need to try and to keep their head above water financially. It's obvious, but if that means you do more than a day a week's paid work, then really seriously consider the part-time course, because you'll be chasing a tail. Absolutely. Quick question for the students, Michaela and Christian. What was the jump like from the LLB to the SQE, or a law conversion course to the SQE, whichever you've done? That came from a student at SOAS. Michaela, how did you find it?
I would say at first it's very different because you need to adapt to a completely different set of exams. In law school, we've never actually done any multiple choice questions. So it took me a few weeks to learn how to approach the multiple choice questions. At the same time, I think law school, the GDL in any degree prepares you quite well with the skills of getting used to a routine and studying quite well. So I would say there are two sides to it.
Cool. Christian, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree. But for me, I obviously had a year between university and the SQE, so I guess the jump was more gradual. But yeah, as Michaela said, it is obviously different. University, you've got essays most of the time. Then the SQE, you've got the multiple choice questions for the first part, which does take getting some used to, yeah.
And the second question we got on this page is from a student at the University of Leicester. There's so much to revise during the revision period. How do you ensure, and how do you structure your revision to make sure you covered every topic, or is that possible? Is that not possible? What was your approach to that, Michaela?
I actually went on the SRA website and I made the specification into a checklist, and I put a specific point next to the topics that I was feeling less comfortable in. So I made sure to allocate more time to those things. I would say it's definitely possible if you start early enough and you're really committed. So yeah.
Yeah, and Aisha, we do recommend, particularly with the black letter law stuff that isn't focused so much on our courses, or pretty much any SQE course wherever you go, really to think about how you prepare for those questions, because what do we recommend and what do we provide to support students with their black letter law revision?
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely recommend the kind of initial assessment that Michaela spoke about, of each individual student working out for themselves against their SQE1 spec, areas that they already feel relatively confident in. And then, as you said, Michaela, any areas where they may need a bit of extra support, revision focus, etc. In terms of resources that we have available to students to help them with that underlying law, that we have obviously various materials available, including some of my students found really helpful. I don't know if Christian and Michaela, this was your experience as well, but refresh sessions that we run on the underlying law. And my students found those really helpful to, particularly as they got closer to those centralised assessments, to refer to those recordings and re-listen to them. And that was a particular source of use for them in the lead up. But I do think it is a very individual assessment in terms of that kind of gap analysis I spoke about, and where each person is. And I think that's one of the reasons, we don't teach that underlying law to students, because we recognize very much that yes, people will need support, but the amount of support that they need will be very different in those, because they're all coming from different places.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Right, we've got lots more stuff to get on with, but very briefly, Aisha and Alison, the booking system for assessments had a lot of bad press over the last year or so, because it was a bit like when I tried to get a Taylor Swift ticket for my daughter and failed miserably, waited all day and still was let down at the end. And the people had a very similar experience trying to book a slot on a particular day to sit SQE1. What's changed, or what is in the process of being changed? Alison, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, you're right, Johnny. There was a lot of comment, and students, I think, did have some difficulty under the kind of previous system. The SRA in recent times has asked students, I think, and I should please do chip in if I've got this wrong, but I think I'm right. Asked students to complete a booking form to basically reserve a seat for the date or the place in which they want to sit their assessments. So it's not a case of actually going onto a website and trying to book a particular location and a particular date, and getting kind of caught up in that system. So that, as far as I'm aware, is working pretty well, and much less stressful and much less time on the computer for students. Is that right, Aisha? Have I got that
No, that's
correct?
absolutely right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's a system that's being piloted. And I think,
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There were problems that students experienced with booking initially, and as you, Johnny, said, the experiences there weren't great, and it's really good to see the SRA and Kaplan responding to that and introducing this new system. And as you say, Alison, so far seems to be working well.
Yeah, and I think for SQE1, they've introduced for the assessment that Michaela and Christian took more assessment days. So there's
Yeah.
more opportunities to sit on more days, and therefore there's less of a clamour for the slot that you wanted, because there were simply more places at that venue. Great stuff. Let's talk about the centralised assessment fees as well, because there's some very recent news on that, of course, isn't there? And that these have increased to the figures you can see on the screen: 1888 for SQE1, just under 3,000 for SQE2, and a total of between the pair of them, £4,790. We really recognise that this is a real challenge to students, isn't it, Aisha and Alison?
Yeah,
Yes, definitely.
absolutely. And it brings back that point that you made earlier, Johnny, about students committing this amount of fees, very much hoping that it's only once, because you want to be getting through really on the first sit for various reasons, but also in particular when you look at these fees as well. So yes, we do fully appreciate the significant burden that these are.
Yeah, and if you fail an assessment, you have to pay the same fee again. Don't think everyone realises that there isn't a reduced fee. The only thing that you can bank is if you pass one of the SQE1 papers, you pay half of that 1888 on a resit. But otherwise, SQE2 is all or nothing. If you fail SQE2, you have to sit the whole of it again, unfortunately. It does go back to the point of making sure you enroll on a really good course that prepares you with a reputable provider that with a good pass rate, that means that hopefully you only need to sit once. I mean, that's one of the issues in terms of accessibility to the profession. There's been a lot of talk about whether the introduction of the SQE has impacted and made it more difficult for people from diverse backgrounds to have access to the legal profession. Obviously, that cost is a real negative for people who are self-funding, but there are some positives in terms of the new regime has improved a couple of things, hasn't it? Alison and Aisha, feel free to chip in. I think there's a couple of things that we want to just highlight that are very positive about the SQE regime.
Yeah, I think that's right, Johnny. I think that there are more openings in terms of how you put together your qualifying work experience. So it doesn't have to be necessarily via the traditional training contract, although for many students that is what they will do. You can actually knit together, can't you, periods of qualifying work experience across different employers and different situations. So I think that was definitely part of the opening up in terms of routes to qualification. There are also graduate solicitor apprenticeships as well, which are a real growth area in terms of access to the profession and being kind of supported through that by an employer. So I think there are certainly positives there to highlight.
But the big question that everyone's got is, well, how do people from underprivileged backgrounds where they're finding it hard enough to get to law school afford to get to law school and pay for those exams in cash on top? We do have something though to offer, Aisha, for students who to help them with the course fees if they go for a particular course. What additional funding is available for students, because not everyone is aware of it from central government?
Yeah, absolutely. So for our master's offerings, Johnny, we have an LLM SQE program, which is eligible for master's funding if individual students are eligible to meet the criteria, and that will then allow them to secure funding for the purposes of their course fees. So to help and assist with that cost.
Yeah, and by and large, if you got funding for your undergraduate degree and it's your first master's,
Yeah.
then you should be eligible for the full amount of the funding, which is now over £12,000, just over £12,000. So it will go and pay for the vast majority of the cost of the fees for the course. But of course, the cost of the exams, which we just showed you, is separate, and that's the big killer from a accessibility point of view that obviously a lot of us are very concerned about. What happens if you don't pass SQE1 on the first resit? Well, we've talked about whether resitting is costly. How many sits do you get, Alison?
It's 3 sits, 3 opportunities to sit. Yeah. So as we've talked about, that's why it's important to be to only really, I think, book in and sit that SQE assessment when you feel really confident that you have got a good chance of passing it. Because obviously, if you sit it without the right level of preparation or not quite in the right kind of headspace to sit it, it's that could be one sit off your 3.
Yeah, the pass rate of resitters is about 35% or thereabouts. It's ranged between 32 and 38%. So it really shows that you really do need, if you do fail once, don't rush in. In fact, you can't rush in, can you, Aisha? Because there are only a limited number of sits for SQE1 a year, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So only the 2 sit points in a year. So in any event, you would, wait that period of time, which Johnny, I think, is absolutely right. I think, if you are in the situation where you find yourself having to resit, as Alison said, you need to think very carefully about your next opportunity to sit, bearing in mind the limited sit count, and you need to make sure that you are in the best possible place you can be in terms of your revision, etc., to get through at that next opportunity as well.
Great stuff. So let's talk about pass rate. So we'll talk about the national pass rate and BPP's pass rate very shortly. But one thing that has caused a lot of concern is that there is, and I'm very passionate about this, there is a very low pass rate for people from certain ethnic minority groups, particularly the Black African and Black Caribbean community and the Asian community. Is there any particular reason why that might be the case. It's very difficult to know because there's some research going on, isn't there, Aisha?
Yeah, absolutely. So Warwick University are looking into this and obviously researching, and we're waiting for the full report on that. It is, very difficult to say, and obviously can speculate on possible reasons for it, but it is hard to determine exactly why that is the case. But as you say, Johnny, it is something that there is concern about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be honest and frank and say this is not a problem that is exclusive to the legal profession, where there's an underperformance of certain minority groups. And yeah, I've got a theory. I don't know whether you think that that might be the case, Alison, when it comes to English as a second language for some students, that might be particularly tricky, particularly for MCQs. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's possible with multiple choice. It's very binary, isn't it? Or it's either right or wrong. And again, I haven't sat an SRA SQE assessment, but when you look at the options, it's kind of the best option. So the options are all quite similar. So it may be that there are nuances of language or interpretation or inference that may not necessarily be picked up, and you can kind of contrast that with a kind of written assessment where students have more opportunity to reflect their knowledge in terms of writing out what their answer is. So that is a possible explanation, but it is a really complicated picture, as you said, and lots of research going into it. We know that the SRA are very alive to it, and also, looking at how that can be, improved, how those outcomes
Yeah.
for those underrepresented students can be improved.
Yeah, when I think the SRA publishes the results from the Exeter University research, I think it'll be really interesting to see. They are saying that the preliminary findings will be published later this year. I think we'll see that with a lot of interest. I think what we're going to do is actually going to talk about the pass rates now, which came from the University of Liverpool. What's BPP's pass rate? We've been asked. I'm going to show you first of all the pass rate from a year ago. So the national pass rate for last year was 51%, 54% for first sitters. BPP students, though, smashed the ball out of the park. Across all of our cohorts, we got a 73% pass rate, and that's having collected the results of over 85% of our students. And our students were doing very, very well in the top two-thirds. It's two-thirds of our students were in the top two quintiles. So the top 40% of students, BPP did very well. But we've just got hot off the press the results from Michaela and Christian's cohort. So thank you both of you for contributing massively. So we got 73% this time last year. What's our pass rate in Michaela and Christian's cohort? This is the first time the public is going to see this. It is a whopping 79%. So congratulations and thank you so much for working so hard for contributing towards that. I think it shows that if students do a good course at a good provider, they've got a much higher chance of passing. We don't know what the national pass rate is because the SRA haven't published their results, but they're due to do so in the next few days, we think, to know what the national pass rate is. But I wouldn't be surprised if we're tracking at least 20% above the national pass rate. And we collected the results from over 75% of our students, which basically tells us that statistically is very obviously going to be very accurate in terms of giving our pass rate. And the critical thing, it's across all cohorts, not cherry picked at all. We literally surveyed all of our students and got the results back from 3/4 of them. I don't know. I think probably we need to put this into context. Maybe Aisha, why don't we have the results for our students, or any provider have the results for the students?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are not provided with the results of our students directly by the SRA. And we therefore, in terms of getting these results, Johnny, as you said, have to go out to students to collect their results and to ask for them to provide them to us. So it's really positive, I think, to see that we've managed to collect results, bearing that in mind, from over 75% of the cohort. That's a really good result for us in terms of getting those in.
Yeah, and it's obviously fabulous news for us.
Yeah.
And we've done extremely well on SQE2 as well, almost 100% pass rate, so 97 and 99% in April and July last year. So again, 20% above the national pass rate. So we are really doing well. BPP is really a badge of quality when it comes to the SQE, and I'm not aware of any provider that's produced all of cohort pass rates to be as transparent as us with our pass rates, which we're obviously very proud of. I want to move on and talk about the recruitment process very briefly before we get a chance to do an MCQ right at the end. The recruitment process, students are obviously very concerned with the high fail rate. How do firms look at candidates who've been unsuccessful? I mean, Michaela and Christian, you may be aware of friends and colleagues who haven't got through first time. What are you hearing on the grapevine?
I think there is a mixture of reactions, and I've heard of quite a lot of firms who have been very sympathetic and supportive towards the whole uncertainty with the SQE.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly our experience, isn't it, Alison, with the many firms that send their students to us, the vast majority of whom have been very, very sympathetic, and for obvious reason. It's a really new assessment, isn't it? And therefore, we need to give these students a break. And it's so different to the LPC, where almost everybody got over the line, particularly those that were sponsored.
Yes, I would agree with that. It is still, it's very much in its infancy, the SQE, and I think that there is a recognition and understanding of that when firms are looking at how their students are doing.
Yeah, I think we can explore some of these other questions when we get to the networking session. I'm very conscious that we've billed this panel session, the initial session, for an hour. So we'll probably explore the SQE versus the LPC thing as well in that additional hour. But I want to give you an opportunity, folks, to have a go at a sample question. Just one question we're going to share with you on the screen here. And what I'll ask for Juliet to do, if you could open the poll, which you'll now see on the right-hand side of your screen, folks. And we're going to give you 1 minute 42 seconds to answer this MCQ, because that's the average amount of time that it takes to answer a question in the exam. It's a contract question, and I'm hoping that because the majority of you are current law students or graduates, you will remember hopefully a little bit of contract or studied a little bit of it so far. So I'm going to give you 1 minute 42 seconds. I'll show the question on the screen now, and when you've got your answer, just click A, B, C, D, or E in the poll on the right hand side of the screen as you can see it. So here is the question. I'll read it out to anybody who may be looking at it on a mobile phone. A man's given a bicycle as a gift. He later agrees to sell it for £25 to a woman, but no payments has yet been made. He subsequently discovers the bike's worth £390. He informs the woman that he no longer wishes to sell the bike because he's mistaken about its value. What advice should the woman be given? And I'll let you read through those options. It's time to make your selections, folks. Just got about another 15 seconds or so. Okay, you've had your time. It's not long to have for a multiple choice question. It's really interesting to see in the comments to see what you think it's like to answer that question in 1 minute 42 seconds. Just put some comments in the chat, and then maybe we could see, or we'll have a look at the votes. So we've got, in terms of the poll, we've got 4% went for option A, 33% went for option B, 16% went for option, where are we? 4.2%, 33% went for option B, 16% for option C, 11% for D, and 34% for option E. Really interesting. Well, the correct answer, which a third of you got right, was option B. There is a contract because sufficient consideration has been promised. So I think the key learning point from this is that consideration for it to be adequate doesn't necessarily have to be at the market value, as long as something that adequate consideration has been promised. So there is a contract, there has been sufficient consideration. You can still have a contract even though part of the consideration is still to be executed. If you want a full detailed blow-by-blow account as to why each option is correct or incorrect, please do go onto my YouTube channel, SQE TV. We'll send you a link to that very shortly, which has got lots of sample questions for you to have a look at, and me having a go against the clock when I saw this question for the first time. But it just shows, I think we could do some nice reflections on this, and maybe Michaela and Christian. I'm not going to ask you whether you got this right or wrong. I'm sure you got it right in your preparation several months ago. When you see a third of the students have got this right, most of whom would have studied contract, what does that tell you? What should the learning point be that a third of the students got that right, having studied contract? It's a tough exam, isn't it? And what about you, Aisha and Alison? Any sort of reflections on that? Because I was expecting maybe half the students to get this right, but
Yeah.
It's a
tough.
long time since I studied contract. That's all I will reveal.
Yes. Me too. But I would say there was a comment there, Johnny, in the chat, where somebody said actually some of the options were quite similarly worded. And I think that comes back to the point that you made earlier, Alison, about, potentially some of the difficulty lying here in terms of taking, yes, you may know the law, but also in terms of reading through and then finding the option within that time as well, that time pressured element. And that's from practice, Johnny. So if we were to maybe factor that in a little bit too, maybe some of those percentages would be higher, with it being technique practice as well as knowledge of the law. I'm always an optimist.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm going to go with that.
So, I mean, Christian, how did you perform with the first few multiple choice questions that you did when you were sort of getting on the course? And did you notice a particular development in terms of your improvement?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely improved. It does get some getting used to. I saw the comment as well, which said that it matters on the wording, which it definitely does. And in this question in particular, it matters on the wording because of cases that you're going to read and like the principles of contract law and consideration between things like sufficient and adequate. And it does take a while to learn and get that in your head and then apply that into multiple choice questions to then get right.
Absolutely. Any final reflections from you, Michaela, on your sort of multiple choice journey?
At first I found it quite difficult as well, but I think over time it definitely got way better. And you definitely learn how to revise the law in order to be able to answer that style of questions.
Great stuff. I just got a link on the chat to the YouTube channel I mentioned that you may wish to subscribe to. It's becoming very popular with students, and it's free and completely independent of BPP or anyone else. Just so you know. So, well, we come to sort of the hour mark now. Thank you so much, and apologies for the slight problem with my internet connection at the beginning of the session. What we're going to do is to sort of move into the networking session where we can answer questions on an informal basis. I would encourage everybody to pop themselves on camera, because we can have a conversation with you rather than something that might be a bit more stilted on text. But if if you're happy with text conversation, that's fine too. We will answer all questions. So yeah, anything that we haven't answered that's in the chat, and I appreciate there were a lot of comments during the hour, we'll be very happy to answer. There were quite a few questions that I'd hoped we'd get on during the course of the hour. My colleague should be posting the link to the slides very shortly. If not on the stage here, certainly we'll be posting that in the session that we're about to have. And just to let you know, Juliet, I think, is now going to tell us how to get access to the networking session.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, everyone, for that discussion. I'm sure that everyone in the audience has learnt loads about SQE1. So as mentioned at the beginning, if you do want to find out even more about the SQE, check out Johnny's channel, SQE TV, and also our SQE FAQs page, which we've made in partnership with BPP. And we've got like dozens of questions up there with answers written by BPP's SQE experts covering loads of different topics. So that's a great resource if you want to look at more information in your free time. So yeah, as Johnny mentioned, the event isn't over yet. We still have an hour of networking for you to ask your questions to our speakers. And once again, as Johnny mentioned, it'd be great if everyone could turn their cameras on and sort of ask their questions verbally to the speakers if you feel comfortable, just because it creates a bit more of a interactive experience. But yeah, so I will direct everyone over to the networking now. So thank you again, everyone on the panel, for giving up your time this afternoon to speak on at this event. So in order to get to the networking, you'll just need to click the blue return button at the bottom of your screen, which will take you to the front of the platform where you can click on the expo on the left-hand sidebar. So I'll just let you go over there now and see you over there.
Before you do, just let me interrupt. The slides now are available for you to download, folks. You can see them in the chat. There's a link there to a link to a Google Drive to the slide deck. So yeah, you'll find those useful, I'm sure. Sorry, Juliet.
Thank you, Johnny. So yeah, for those in the audience, to head over to the networking, you'll just need to click on the expo on the left-hand side of your page. Once you're in the expo, click on BPP's banner to enter the booth. As I mentioned, we'd recommend sharing your audio and video just to make it a bit more of an interactive experience. And once your question has been answered, it would be great if you could come off screen to let other students go up and ask their own questions, just to make sure that the session runs as smoothly as possible. So I think that was everything I had to say. I hope everyone enjoyed this afternoon's event. I will head over to the networking now and hopefully see lots of you over there. Thank you very much.
Just to remind you, you click the return button at the bottom of the screen to get there. Great stuff. See you there. Thanks a lot, folks. And thank you again to Legal Cheek for helping us host. And thanks to our wonderful panel. See you again in a few minutes.
Thank you. Thanks, Juliet.